Welcome to Coffee and Contemplation. I'm Robin.
I'm Heidi.
And we're discussing Chapter 7, The Massacre at Hawkins Lab. So we're changing things up this episode. We are going to revert back to the chronological order, as we have been doing for the majority of the podcast. And the reason for that is pretty simple. It's just the fact that this is the episode where we're just over halfway through, as Steve pointed out last episode, halfway through the season, that is. And this is the episode, though, where a lot of the threads start to come together. There's a lot of overlap, particularly the final sequence where we've got Hawkins overlapping with Elle, and there's just so much that happens in this episode. So trying to separate the groups out, I think, was just going to be confusing.
Yeah, they interact with each other so much more now.
Mm-hmm. So, with that said, let's proceed with contemplation. Again, we're not going to, no transition. We're just diving right in. And this episode opens exactly where the last one left off. You know, Steve and I talked a little bit about it at the end of last episode, but we got to this moment and then
yeah, for sure. I mean, it ended with such a cliffhanger.
Mm-hmm.
No bathroom breaks, no snack breaks. Too bad.
Yeah. We get this sequence where they fight the bats, they save Steve, and then they go off to the woods. The sequence plays really well. The only thing that still bugs me is Nancy's hey there. Like, we don't need it. I get the rhythm of wanting a pause right there, but it's a little ridiculous that she would take the time. That's just seems not in Nancy's character, frankly.
Yeah, she's a very, kick-ass quips later.
Mm-hmm. They have this great team effort of not only rescuing him, but then getting away from the Demobats. And then we come out of the title sequence into the interrogation, following up with where we last left Sullivan and Wallace.
The torture device that they are using on Wallace is, sometimes it's just called the box. I have heard it referred to as a hot box. And it's a method of torture in which a person is placed in a very, very confined space, essentially a coffin, and subjected to extreme heat. That's exactly what they're doing here.
Mm-hmm.
It has some very, very dark origins in the United States, especially. This is a method of torture that would be employed against enslaved peoples, particularly in the very hot, humid regions of the South. Exactly what happens to Wallace is what will happen to a human when they are confined in an extremely enclosed, extremely hot space. People can die from this kind of treatment. It is also a method of torture that has survived into modern times. So I absolutely buy that a shady government organization would torture members of its own, agents from its own force in order to, get information out of them if they felt that agent had gone rogue in some way. Because both Wallace and General Sullivan are both Black, I feel like there are some people, maybe people in production or whatever would be like, no, it's fine. I don't think it is. And again, I am not the person to speak with authority on this, but I have to say it really, really bothered me.
Yeah, there's always been something about it that's real. It's unusually uncomfortable about it. Yeah, it's short, but packs a very, very big punch.
Yeah.
We get that edit where we transition from Wallace saying, just promise you won't kill her, to we cut to 11. And we shift into the scene of her with the Coke can. Outside of Nina trying to work on her powers, she's flashing back to the massacre. We get Brenner and Owens talking. I have to, call myself out a little bit. When Owens goes through his mini speech here about I've compromised my principles and, my morals and, I've risked my family's safety, my safety, et cetera, et cetera. Technically this is an on-camera acknowledgement of what he's done, which is, I said back in chapter 5 that we don't get an on-camera acknowledgement. I stand by the fact that I said we didn't get it in that episode or in chapter 6. I think his actions later on in chapter 8 kind of demonstrate where he ultimately falls, but I just don't like that we don't get it's still just not quite enough for me. This back and forth that we get, it feels like, well, we got to stick it in here somewhere.
Yeah. I really like the exchange between Owens and Brenner. I found that exchange made sense of the dichotomy between Owens and Brenner and why Owens would work with Brenner.
This is also when Owens is like, we're not getting anywhere.
Yeah.
And so that's when we shift from Brenner and Owens to Brenner and 11. And this is when he says the line about you're regressing. And she keeps saying, I saw what I did. I'm a monster. And he just lets her believe that. This was the place to tell her that she didn't do it. We don't, and I said to you, we as the audience don't necessarily need to see him tell her. But I think to show him deliberately not inform her that that's not actually what happened.
Yeah.
This doesn't entirely justify to me, like I struggle with her deciding to go back in. Like a lot of what he says about, you speak of monsters and superheroes, it just doesn't quite work. It doesn't, I feel like a phrase I'm using a lot this season is it just doesn't quite hang together.
Yeah.
And I made sure to go back and watch parts of chapter 8 before this because I wanted to make sure that I was right in my recollection of chapter 8 in terms of, yeah, he knows exactly what happened. So the fact that he doesn't tell her some version of, you're not quite remembering it right.
Yeah.
And I think you do. And I feel like there's a way that even from Brenner, they could have made something of that, but he deliberately chooses to let her continue to think that she's the monster. And I guess my question that I'm left with is why? Like genuinely, how does that serve him? If the ultimate point is for her to remember her own strength.
Yeah.
How does her continuing to think she's a monster actually serve any of them?
It doesn't.
I mean, that's kind of an open question. Like, I actually kind of put that to the listeners. Like, is this just something that isn't clicking for us? Or is this a genuine kind of, one of the messy side effects of the way that all of this is constructed? Because they can't tell us this yet. They want this big reveal at the end of the episode. They've been setting it. This is the centerpiece of Elle's arc in a lot of ways this season. So if they don't want us to know, if they want this big reveal that she didn't actually kill all the kids, then they can't tell us this here. I think there's some way to allude to, like, it's not quite that cut and dry, which is, I think, what they are going for with what Brenner says. But again, it just doesn't make sense to me why he wouldn't tell her some version of it here.
I resent, and I always have, that this is not just the arc that Elle has to go through, but I resent that this is the arc that the audience has to go through. We don't need the audience, to think that Elle killed all these kids. I don't think that it creates any kind of emotional tension. I don't think that the resolution of finding out, no, she didn't actually kill all these kids, provides any emotional catharsis. And there are so many things in this season that do provide emotional catharsis. This just fully is not one of them. I remember saying to you and saying to our friends all the way, back last year, I don't believe for a minute that she killed those kids. Like, if they were introducing an Elle who had killed a whole bunch of children at 9 years old, then that fundamentally is a different character.
Yep.
Do I think that they could have manipulated the plot in such a way that we, the audience, knew this whole time that somebody else, not even saying it's Vecna, somebody else killed these kids, but that Elle thinks she killed them? I can believe that, because Am I a Monster is the struggle that Elle has been wrestling with all the way since we first met her. So yes, I think that something could happen, or some sort of like flashback or dream or something like that could lead Elle to believe that she had done this.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't understand why we, the audience, are being told like, oh, this happened. She did. Like, no, she didn't. I know she didn't. Like, the creators and writers of Stranger Things are too talented for plot twists to be this clunky.
Brenner tells her here, this place is not a prison. It's like bullshit. She was denied informed consent. You're trapping her right now by not telling her the truth.
He's trapping her through manipulation.
Absolutely.
And I mean, one thing that I, kind of picked up on, again, because of rewatch, was how much he sounds like Vecna in this scene. Using like the psychobabble of, healing and talking about trauma and talking about like past experiences and embracing the shadow and all of that. But like, it's bullshit.
If this was L11 and Owens, changes in the entire chemistry of this moment. And he's like, I'm not really sure how to convey this information to you, but I really think you need this final piece. I mean, I don't hate this dynamic between the two of them, like to some degree, in spite of what I've said about that previous scene. I actually do kind of like the juxtaposition of them as characters, especially because, like you said, like we're expecting like more sort of kickback from Owens to Brenner's lead here. But from that, we shift to Hawkins, to Dustin, Lucas, and Max being questioned by the police and the parents. As much as I do enjoy Erica calling them out for lying, I did wonder, like, why is she even allowed to be in that room?
Why is she in there? And also, like, Erica has her own code of ethics, 100%. But why is she snitching?
I like that eventually, we get this, okay, Powell stands up and goes, shut up, one at a time. That reminded me of Hopper from season 1. I also found myself wondering, why did they not start with questioning them one at a time? And probably because they're kids. But also, like, more importantly, where is Max's mother? Like, why, something we talked about in chapter 3 was, why is 11 questioned without a parent there? And same question here.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those things where, like, cops in entertainment and cops in real life bear absolutely no resemblance to one another. I guess for this, they were like, oh, they're not detained. Because, like, later on in the scene, one of the parents, I don't remember who, says, like, do we need to call our lawyers? And I think it's Callahan is like, no, we don't even know that they did anything.
No, it's Daniels who says that.
Daniels.
Yeah, I think. Meanwhile, the Upside Down Quartet, as I'm going to call them, hides from the demo bats until the bats leave, I guess. And then that's when we get Steve keeling over so they can bandage him up. I still really love the way the sequence is put together. It's great. I still love Robin's concern for him here. The idea of him keeling over when he does makes all of the sense to me. Like, Nancy says you're losing a lot of blood. But I actually think what's happening is that his adrenaline just wears off. I also want to add that this scene could have so easily strayed into really awkward territory or heavy-handed territory, especially since he's breathing heavily, he's groaning a lot.
Yeah.
And, that's always such a tricky line to walk with sound design. And thinking about that actually led me to a key point that there's no musical score here. It's just sound design. And the more I thought about that, the more I love that choice. It ends up creating this mood that reflects the precariousness of their circumstance. Like, they're not leading us.
Right.
But the characters also don't really quite know what this means either for themselves. And I think that's brilliant. It's this, like, we're literally holding our breath in this moment.
Yeah. Sometimes music can add to the feeling of intimacy of a scene, like, the very, very famous pottery scene with Unchained Melody.
Yeah.
In that case, I think the music enhances the feeling of intimacy. But in this case, different scene, different context. I think the lack of music actually enhances the feeling of intimacy because so much is focused on just the sound of their breath, the hesitation in her voice, the pause before he answers. And so much of that, like, it's so detailed.
I just feel like it conveys a certain level of understanding. Like, they both realize what's happening, but what does that mean? They're not making a choice, and we're not meant to either. And I think that's really important.
Yeah.
But, oh yeah, there's chemistry here. They didn't, I mean, even if we are meant to infer romance here, we don't need music for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I said last episode that there's a lot of good examples of female gaze in The Boat. This is also a good example of female gaze. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. And even the physicality of it, like when Nancy is bandaging him up, it could get very male gazy because he's elevated and she's lower. But the way that he holds his body, the way that he does and does not look at her, the way that it's shot, like, at an angle, like, we're not making it weird. A lot of that is very female gaze. There is something that's very female gaze about, guy gets beat up and then allows his lady fair to help him. That's like catnip, to a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, and also the way it's lit. In spite of how much emphasis is on her bandaging him up, a lot of where the light is placed, it's on their faces. That's where the emphasis still is. And so that's what I mean when I think like last episode when I said there's not a lot of emphasis on the physicality. That's kind of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Afterwards, this is where they convey to Eddie that it's all a hive mind. This is also when Robin suggests, because it's Robin's idea first, that they get some guns from the police station, which is what gives Nancy the idea that they can go to her house instead, to which Eddie responds, "You, Nancy Wheeler, have guns, plural, in your bedroom."
Yeah, he just doesn't know her very well yet.
No.
I also love the exchange immediately thereafter with Steve and Nancy, where she's like, yeah, I have a such and such and a so-and-so. I hate guns.
Russian Makarov and a revolver.
Yeah. And Steve was like, oh, you almost shot me with that one. She definitely smiles when she's like, you almost deserved it.
Yeah, I gather from that exchange that it's sort of I haven't forgotten about what you did, but it's also kind of a weird, like, it's almost like an admission of, I see that you're not that person anymore. That's a bit of a reach, but that's my headcanon.
Okay, fair enough.
And then, yeah, we get the earthquake, which this is new. And I love Eddie's response. Yeah, so guns seem like a pretty good idea to me. Love that. Back in Russia, we get the pre-Demogorgon fight. This is Hopper and Antonov talking about their odds. I really like the detail that Hopper brings up Antonov's son Mikhail in a positive way to make it clear that what he said in the fight, in air quotes, last episode wasn't really how he felt. That was just an act.
Oh my God. Quintessentially bros in a very, like, what strikes me as ironic, considering that, like, this arc takes place in Russia and that Antonov is Russian. The relationship between them, the arc of their relationship, it's so American. Hopper talks about, like, why is he here? Like, what is his purpose? And maybe his purpose is to kill this thing that's trying to hurt Elle, even if he dies in the attempt. There's so much pain in that, and so much, like, lack of self-worth. And I don't even necessarily think that it comes from a place of, like, depression and PTSD. I think there is that aspect in Hopper's characterization. I think Hopper has very, very much struggled with that, and we've talked about it. But I think that there's a cultural expectation and belief that particularly afflicts American men, that the only worth and purpose that you have is to physically protect the people that you care about, especially if that means sacrificing your life. And that's such a cruel thing to put on any human person. And I think what gets lost so much is, like, do we think that Elle wants Hopper to die killing a Demogorgon to protect her? No, Elle wants him alive. Joyce wants him alive. They need him alive. They love him. This, I think, like, is actually really strong narratively because we get to confront that.
Yeah.
We get to come out the other side of it with Hopper alive.
Yes.
And hopefully he can have some version or some realization that he is wanted and needed and loved alive. He is worth so much more alive.
We watch him get that when he and Joyce are reunited.
Yeah.
And I think this is great setup for that. I also think that this is great setup for what happens next episode when Hop asks about 11 and Joyce says she misses her dad.
Yeah.
And that is something that I don't think I realized how powerful that line. I mean, believe me, I appreciate how powerful that line is, but seeing how they set it up here, I'm so much more impressed on the rewatch. And I really, really, really value that setup here. Maybe I am a curse, but maybe I can at least do some good while I'm here.
Yeah.
Even if that's true. It's so reflective of what I think they were trying to do with Elle. I think it's successful with Hop. It's not totally successful with Elle, but it works here. Oh, it definitely works here.
Yeah.
But I would also argue that in a way, I think also the metaphor could be that Joyce is his miracle. And I am okay with that symbolism.
Joyce is a miracle. Let's be real.
Love is the miracle.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that's cheesy, but it's why we loved chapter 4. But also then we get the scene where Murray drives the van to the checkpoint and successfully gets past it. I got to say, hats off to Brett Gelman impersonating Yuri. Like,
oh my God.
Yeah. Past Brenner gives 11 a quick checkup and he / questions her, but she claims to not remember anything. And this is, of course, followed by Brenner giving the lesson on the rules, which includes collaring, too. And in spite of how kind of unpleasant this sequence is, I actually really like the complexity of it.
Yeah.
This is actually pretty rare. We don't see Brenner do stuff quite like this very often. And I like that about it.
Yeah, because he's a very controlled villain. And when he is violent, he usually is like sending out foot soldiers.
Yeah, this is almost an overly emotional Brenner.
Mm-hmm. Some of the dynamics that in this scene that I thought were really interesting was 2 is he's kind of playing at Papa's game. He's not doing it very well, partly because he's so young. Mm-hmm. But when you have a group of people who are confined to a given space and not allowed to leave, then these like deeply toxic hierarchies are going to develop.
That's why the bullying last episode made so much sense to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Meanwhile, in Hawkins, the quartet continue to walk toward the Wheeler house through the woods, and this is when we get the scene, get Eddie and Steve's conversation, starting with Steve thanking Eddie for saving his ass. Mm-hmm. A lot of Eddie's explanation of his disbelief regarding Steve and the idea that he could actually be this like good person it sounds very similar to, I think, a lot of the fandom's experience with Steve, including my own. Mm-hmm. We had that experience when we reviewed season 1. Like we went back and went, right, he starts in such a different place. Mm-hmm. When Eddie says, I wouldn't have jumped into the lake to save your ass, I'm going to take a different track here. I've been saying that Eddie doesn't give himself enough credit, but I think here it's more that he winds up serving as a very relatable character. You know, he says and acts often the way I think a lot of us would. Mm-hmm. And I mean, at one point, you know, Eddie even says like, you know, something about the two ladies. And I'm like, yeah, but they've both been through all of this adventuring stuff before. This is Robin's second time out. Nancy's been dealing with this since 83. Like, it's just your first rodeo.
Exactly.
You know,
I think a lot of us have a kind of conception of ourselves that, like, you know, if a monster attacked, that we would run out and, run out and kill it and blah, 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 blah. But then when something traumatizing actually happens, sometimes we are confronted with the fact that we react differently than we anticipated. What I think is really great about Eddie in this episode is, yeah, he has this concept of himself as having run away, which we talked about, like there was nothing that he could have done, et cetera, et cetera. But in this situation where he is given a choice of what to do, he dove in. Yes, he dove in after the other two. And yes, he had his little like temper tantrum before he did, but he did it. I think that what he's struggling with is that he had to do it scared. Mm-hmm. And there's a difference between doing it scared and not doing it, you know?
Again, that makes you more brave, sir.
Exactly.
That's literally what courage and bravery is. It's doing something even though you're scared shitless about it.
Of course.
Yeah.
And that's the lesson that he's learning here. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I mean, thinking about the beginning of the episode, he did not hesitate to attack those bats. Mm-mm. He didn't stand off to the side and go, eek. Like, he actively participated in trying to save Steve's life, in trying to save Nancy's life. He was right there, part of the action, as much as the other three.
The only thing I don't like about this exchange is that Steve starts to say that. Like, I think Steve is on the on-ramp to saying, literally, we've all been there.
Yeah.
I think we would have had that conversation, but Eddie interrupts him to point out that Nancy dove in after him and how it's the sign of unambiguous true love. You know, so it almost makes me in that way resent the love triangle that much more, because it is what interrupts this moment that could have led to Steve giving Eddie a lot more credit.
True, but I don't think Eddie was ready to hear it.
Probably not. And also, I like the sort of other side of that. That is, it's a character moment of Eddie saying, don't make the mistake I did of not not reaching out to a person who you care about clearly. I mean, because he says, I don't know what happened between the two of you. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we know that Steve is perfectly aware of what he's talking about.
Yeah.
But depending on how you read the scene, to me, it's very clear that he's thinking about Chrissy in this moment.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's very, very insightful. I think he's thinking about Chrissy in terms of their conversation at the, in the woods of, oh, we used to hang out. Mm-hmm. And him like thinking of, selling her drugs as the opportunity to reconnect. But also I think he's kind of thinking Nancy did the thing that he wished he could do for Chrissy.
Oh, that's a great point. Yeah, that scene is very, very prominent or present in this exchange, I think.
Yeah. Also very, very normal to come away from a extremely upsetting life ending or life endangering experience with a very like carpe diem kind of attitude.
Then they end up, eventually they reach the Wheeler house. We see Dustin in the bathroom trying to reach out to the quartet because they still don't know what happened because they didn't even see them go in the water. So we've been collared by the law.
Right.
Then he goes back into the kitchen and he tells Lucas that the quartet wouldn't be stupid enough to go through the gate without a plan. And that I want to point out, like, that's still true. Steve didn't like just go in. He didn't choose to go through there. He was pulled in and the others dove in to save his life. So yes. I think the kids would have done exactly the same thing in that situation.
Oh, 100.
I'm on record as saying this already in other places, but it is so nice to see Lucas and Dustin get such quality screen time together.
To pull a meme from Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and you'll hear it again.
Yes.
Like, both of them are, like, just still they still got it. They still got that magic.
And, of course, that dynamic is just made all the better once Erica joins them. I'm not entirely sure, though, why they don't just clue Erica in the first place. She knows everything. I don't see her as a potential loose cannon. I see her as an asset. Like, if this was season 3, I'd buy that that she's, quote, just the annoying little sister. But she's not that anymore. She's smart, she's capable, she's tough as nails. Lucas implies that she's kind of a blabbermouth here. Don't tell mom or dad or Tina. But, like, I don't remember that being a part of Erica's characterization before. Like, in fact, she's very good at keeping secrets. We've seen her do the whole tell Lucas I've been covering for his ass for 2 days. It's so I found that was an odd choice. Like, again, I don't mind the way we get to this exchange of like, do you copy? And like the smothering me in my sleep part, but not much else. Like, that all like works, and I like Ferguson and McLaughlin's dynamic together, but it just seemed odd of the like, we're not going to tell her. Like, I don't know.
No, you're absolutely right. I wouldn't have expected her to be a danger of like running to her parents. I might have leaned more on the BFF thing. I'm kind of willing to forgive it just because it's funny and because it's so like classic brother and sister. They're threatening her life and she's just like drinking the empty juice, like not a care in the world.
It doesn't actively bother me. It was just something that really, like, when I, again, applying the like critical analysis perspective, I was like, wait a minute, why did they go this route? Like,
no, you're right.
Yeah. I mean, even like right away, she asks a very insightful question.
Mm-hmm. Why would the commies open up a gate in the middle of the lake?
And then they're like, so it just opened up for fun. And then, I mean, Dustin even says like, no, she raises an excellent question. And I remember the first time through going, yes, like this whole bit with Dustin speculating, his theorizing, like Matarazzo handles this kind of dialogue just like an absolute champ.
Yeah, which is tough because it is pure exposition.
Yes. This was actually the moment where I went, I do wonder why it's taking Pal this long to talk to Max. And this is early in this sequence.
I mean, they went through all the Lover's Lake questions and then they were exchanging fashion tips. That's what it was.
But then shifting to the upside down when the quartet come inside the Wheeler house. And again, Steve with the passive perception, I swear he overhears Dustin and puts it together that there's a crossover, which is ultimately what ends up saving them. Mm-hmm. Upstairs, Nancy realizes that they're stuck in 83. And dude, I love the reveal of this.
Nancy is coming to it quite gradually, you know, this isn't right. That's not right. Yeah, like that was really cool.
I went back to chapter 4 to look at the room because I was like, that was the last time that we were in Nancy's bedroom. I want to check. I want to see what the differences are. And yeah, it all tracks. And I actually started to wonder if that's actually part of the reason that they had Robin poking around the room, because they kind of wanted to draw attention to the space, even though she's not drawing attention like to the mirror or to the wallpaper, like, or at this point, it just looks like paint. It's like a pink paint, you know, on the wall as opposed to the striped wallpaper. But I was like, if that was the case, that was actually a really brilliant move because it does bring attention to the room, but not in like a hugely like obvious way.
Yeah.
This is also one of the few specifically plot related things, aspects, questions about season 4 that I am really interested in for season 5 because this was such a curveball and it doesn't really affect the narrative yet. I think it's very likely that it will in season 5. We'll see how well any of this conversation tracks. And also, I fully appreciate the line, you know, when Eddie is like, well, maybe you left them somewhere else. And she's like, there's an 8-year-old in the house. I know where I keep my guns.
Yeah. Yeah, which like IRL, I would be like, would you like to have a conversation about why it's not a good idea to have guns in the house at all? When your baby sister is under 10 years old. But like, you know, in the context of the show, it works perfectly.
It's the best way, I think, because they probably ran into the issue of like, we want Nancy to have guns. It makes sense that she would have guns, all things considered. I mean, but Holly does also live there.
Yeah.
But then back downstairs, Steve is shouting for Dustin, and slowly the others hear him too, which is when Nancy tries the lights. But again, Steve who catches the detail of the light that's already on. And on the other side, Erica catches the lights flickering. No lie, I actually have that light fixture in my condo.
Yeah, you paused it and then you were like, look over there. And I was like, oh, holy shit.
Yep. The only difference between the one I have and the one in the show is that they have little lampshades over the actual lights. I'll take a picture and throw it up on our Instagram.
Yeah.
And then Dustin, of course, is the one who catches that it's Morse code. Back in Russia, Murray rehearses until the major comes in and Joyce gives the major like an earful. It's not super tactful, but like I don't blame her in the slightest.
That is so fitting with Joyce's character.
Yep.
Anything less would just not have, you know, wouldn't have been believable.
Yeah. You know, as they're like led outside to see the prisoners being told the rules, in quotes, Joyce sees Hopper, and that's a big moment. Like, they've succeeded in what they set out to do, but like, now what? Speaking of now what, 11, back in the Rainbow Room, and the other numbers are shooting daggers at her. But the orderly intervenes to play chess. He tells her that the big thing about their planning to kill her and that Papa has been planning it this way. They were let out of their rooms by him. When I was on Ham Radio, the Ham Radio podcast, Ashley asked me if I thought that any of what Henry tells 11 here is true.
No.
Yeah, that was my reaction too.
He has demonstrated in his own fashion an attachment to 11 that simply doesn't make sense. Now, I 100% understand why Elle would believe it.
Same.
At that time. But no, like, do I as an audience member? No. I know exactly who let the other numbers out of their room. It was him.
It was him. And so the orderly offers her the key card to get, quote, free from this hell. And just want to observe, this was one of the moments during the rewatch of this episode that I noticed, like, what Jamie Campbell Bower does with his face in this episode is outstanding.
Yeah.
It's so genuine. It's such a great setup for the turn that he's going to make.
Campbell Bower's performance as orderly runs circles around his performance as Vecna. And I don't mean that as an insult to his performance as Vecna, because that is also very good. And like, you know, obligatory statement about the face being pretty, but like the way that he's able to use like how he tilts his head and the way that he makes eye contact and pair that with his natural voice instead of the like, you know, rah Vecna voice is just so much more effective, both in tricking you into thinking that he's sympathetic. But then as we get into the rest of the, later part of the episode, when he turns bad, he is rotten. That also is a lot more effective to me.
You're also tapping a little bit into just the way the characters are different.
Yes.
Like, he's a lot more interesting, I think, to both of us anyway, before he becomes Vecna.
Yeah. And like watching the slow progression from this like very cuddly demeanor of Orderly when he was like befriending her, sliding more and more into this like more sinister kind of figure. It's really fun to watch. It's really fascinating to watch. It's especially fun to rewatch and to try to kind of track it as it happens. Yeah, it's really cool.
We bounce back to Hawkins after that, and we get the whole back and forth between the trio and the quartet via the light bright. Yeah, I mean, I love every bit of this. The little jokes, the little quips back and forth.
The only thing about this like whole sequence is you've got this house packed with cops and grown-ups of all descriptions, and you think that they're not going to notice like that the kids are like shouting like, "Where are you? Can you hear me? Go to Eddie's," like, or whatever,
right,
like absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the cops would have heard that conversation.
Yeah.
But I'm not. That's a don't worry your pretty little head about it. And I'm not going to.
Nope. Downstairs, Max finally gets let out of questioning, but that's when they sneak out, slash the tires, so the cars can't follow them.
Absolutely love that Erica had the foresight and the weapon at hand to slash the tires.
That's a great point. Then we swing back again to Elle. We finally get to the Massacre's overlap. It begins. And then we get the introduction of the inhibitor, Soteria.
Yeah, and just that whole scene was one of the clearest examples of how Henry is manipulating Elle, because the whole goal of this exercise for him was to get her to take that Soteria out of him. And I said, oh yeah, this is like, he's so incredibly manipulative and so like skilled at manipulation. And you said, yeah, but he's banking a lot on it occurring to her to volunteer to get the thing out of him. And I said, yes, but also like he is such a master manipulator that if she hadn't thought of it on her own, then he might have like brought it around to like, I wish I could go with you. Do you think you could help me?
In the moment you said that he might have gone, no, I can't go with you. Unless.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he's absolutely preying on her sense of empathy.
Mm-hmm. The skill of these scenes, both in writing, directing, acting, so on and so forth, is almost a double-edged sword because things start to fall apart right at the end of the episode. But, up to this point, it's
great.
It's great.
It's great. And kind of speaking of great, we go back to Russia for the Demogorgon fight and like...
Yo.
And I really enjoy this whole sequence. Even at its most ridiculous, like even at its most gory, I found myself thinking a lot about what you and I said about the fight at Hopper's cabin in season 3, about like once the fight starts with the meat flare, or as you call it, the blob monster, how even though it's just spectacle, like we both really enjoy the spectacle of that fight because of how well it's done.
Yep.
This moves the story forward a little bit more than that does, but this is same vibe. Like it's spectacle, it's a fight sequence, but it's great.
Yes.
And I love that, like, Antonov kind of gets to be the leader here a little bit because Hop's doing his thing, which is vital.
Right.
But Antonov gets to kind of lead the guys. Unfortunately, none of them make it.
There's no version of this in which they all make it. Like,
Well, I mean, as you and I said, like, Murray's like, tell them to, he says to the general, like, once he pulls the gun and says, like, okay, release our friend, like, tell them to shoot it. We're like...
That won't work.
It doesn't work.
Yeah.
Like...
You need flamethrowers.
Yes. Well, and it's funny, though, because also, like, credit to Murray, like, his quick fight with the Russians in that control room, that is the vibe I wanted on the plane. There's,
For sure.
There's no joke. It's, you know, you get kind of the joke when Joyce just starts pressing all of the buttons.
Well, you get kind of the joke when Murray's like, well, I gotta hand it to you. You're all committed, you know. I love that he just like kicked their asses and didn't shoot them all.
Yes.
That feels more authentic to Murray to me.
And Hopper throwing the spear at the last second.
Yes.
Like, it actually reminded me, speaking of that cabin fight in season 3, that actually kind of like weirdly reminded me of when Elle splits the blob monster's head open.
Both of them knew that it wasn't going to kill the monster, but it was a bid to injure it enough to buy some time. And it was effective.
And then we get Hop and Joyce's reunion.
I know, it's so nice.
Underscored by the track Unambiguous True Love.
Oh, really?
Yep, that's the name of the title. That's the name of the track right there.
I love it. I love that there's no dialogue. I love that that's not when they go for the kiss. I love that they have the embrace. And I even love that we can see like Enzo's blurry face in the background also smiling.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, Enzo still exists. He's still there. He's watching this and smiling.
I love everything about their reunion, except I wish that there had been some, at least momentary acknowledgement that Murray's there too.
Yeah. I think if you wanted to do that, that it would be best to have Joyce be behind Murray and him to see Murray first. Because I think that once he caught sight of Joyce, that he was not seeing anything else.
I think that would have been just a nice touch.
Yeah.
Because I don't like how he keeps getting sidelined in that way, especially when he just did what he did.
Yeah.
And so much of them getting in was dependent on him. Yeah, like Murray was a critical part of this arc. We also both joked about the idea that like right after it cuts is probably when like either or both Antonov and Murray are both like, okay, can we go?
Yeah.
Like we need to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
There is big monster.
Right.
You know.
More Soviet soldiers are coming. Back in Hawkins, both parties arrive at their versions of Eddie's trailer. The last time we saw Eddie's trailer from the right side up perspective was when Agent Stinson was there. It did not look like that. Like, how long does it take for the gate to fully cook? Was a question I was left with.
Yeah.
We do swing back to 11 at that point. And this is when we get Al removing the device. We get that first hint of his darker nature when he looks at it, but the way when he turns back to look at her, he's friendly again. There's the short chase through the facility until the guards catch them. And then, yeah, we get the reveal of our orderly's powers, followed by the reveal that he is, in fact, one.
Yeah. The majority of the guards he just tosses around, and she's like, whoa, that was unexpected, you know, kind of reaction. But when he breaks that last guard's neck, when the guard like has his hands up and is saying like, I surrender, please don't hurt me, please don't hurt me. I mean, he doesn't say that, but like his body language is sure saying that.
He's clearly beaten.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's where he loses her, because from that moment on, it's not the reveal of his powers. It's the way that he uses them.
His cruelty. Yeah.
That loses her.
And yeah, we leave her in that closet. We go back to Hawkins, where they're creating the landing pad, as Dustin eventually calls it, and they throw the sheet rope through. It's such a cool moment.
Yes.
It's so cool. I love the little high five between Dustin and Erica. That's great. I love them.
Their dynamic is just awesome.
It's great. And then I love the see you on the other side exchange, and it didn't occur to me until this watch that it doesn't happen. At least I don't think so, because I think that by the time that exchange happens, Nancy is already in the trance.
Yeah.
Unless Steve said it, and then she thought she responded, because he starts going, Nancy, you know, but I think the implication is it didn't happen.
Yeah.
And that, I hate that. But yeah, Nancy falls into her Vecnavision, into the pool. I have to say too, like, it's real subtle and it's real brief, but I really love the way Dyer plays her reaction to seeing Barb's corpse. It's not like, it's a kind of horror, but it's sadness.
She looks heartbroken.
Yes. And whether that was Dyer's choice or it was the Duffer Brothers' choice, because they directed this episode and it was their direction for her to play it that way, whoever's decision it was, great call. We swing back to 11, to the Rainbow Room, where 1 is killing 2. At least we think it's 2.
Right, because I noticed when 2 was in the infirmary that he still had the marks on his neck from the collar.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks as though the kid on the wall also has marks on his neck from the collar. And, the way that Vecna kills people, they certainly end up with a lot of marks on their body, but not usually like that type of mark, like around the neck.
Yeah. But yeah, this is when we officially get the reveal that Elle didn't kill them, 1 did.
Mm-hmm.
I want to give credit absolutely to Campbell Bower. There's also a lot of elements at play with that. Like, one thing I noticed on the rewatch was the use of like the wardrobe and makeup.
Mm-hmm.
Well, more the makeup and the hair. Once he makes that full turn, the hair is pulled back out of his face and it makes his face look more angular.
Yeah.
And then also the cinematography, the way his face is lit, the way they shoot it, the angle to make his face look longer and less round, less like friendly. And it's so
and
impressive.
Even after the massacre, after, he has expended all of this power, yes, they want him to look more frightening, but also like there are like blue shadows under his cheekbones that make them stand out so much more, and like his eyes look so much more gaunt. And I think that speaks to like the dualness of he's expended all this power, so his battery is getting low, but also like this dude is fucking evil. It was super effective like visually, but also I certainly did not like go, oh, makeup,
Right.
the first time I watched it. And on rewatching it, I was like, oh, I love what they did with that because it's so effective.
And then again, all of that combined with his performance. Yeah, A+. The editing in this sequence too, when Elle walks into the room, she takes in the victims first, the other numbers, before she takes in Henry.
Yeah.
And he traps her inside, and thus begins his monologue intertwined with Nancy's experience inside Vecna's mindscape. The whole end of the episode we're talking about now. I was really hoping that coming to this episode, having not binged the season, having not even watched the episodes, like 6 into 7 completely, but it's a very, very heavy ending.
Yeah.
Like, this is a very extensive sequence. But because it's the final movement of an 1.5 hour long episode, I do think after some time away from it, I do still think that there's an element to this ending sequence that feels both paradoxically too long and also somehow rushed. And that weird imbalance just ends up creating a really weird tonal response. There is an imbalance between what 11 now would think and feel and how she would respond to this information versus her 9-year-old self. And I want to also emphasize that when I mention her age, because I know I've mentioned her age a lot, it's not just the age itself. It's the idea of how much of the world does she even understand? Her understanding of life, existence is so skewed.
Yeah.
When Henry is sitting here monologuing about go to work, do this, do that, like stuff that makes complete sense to 11. Now that she has lived in the world, her reaction feels very baked into the 11 that we know now.
Yeah.
I wanted to feel differently about it. I don't. The monologue itself isn't what bothers me. It's all of 11's reaction to it. Her motivation is very often her wanting to protect others and her empathy. That is what Henry even himself plays on. Or preys on, rather. But here, that's not enough to overpower him. What is enough to overpower him is the fact that she remembers her own birth and hearing her mother say, I love you. That ultimately feels like we want something else right here, but what do we have from her limited life experience? To echo something you said in season 3, it feels weird to say it's not believable in a series where we have all this other supernatural shit going on, but I don't find it believable. I don't know. There's no other way to say it. I understand that's the through line and that it's that she's loved, right? In terms of how this sequence plays out. And I do actually, like from from a spectacle perspective, I enjoy the moment where they face off, but it doesn't hold a lot of water for me.
No. So the problem that I have at the end of the episode is, first of all, Henry's monologue goes on way too long. After a certain point, it's just raving. To your point, 9-year-old Elle is not going to absorb any of this monologue. It's a non-starter. It's obviously not going to work. Someone who was as skilled a manipulator as Henry should know it wasn't going to work. Now, do I believe that 9-year-old Elle had an insane level of power and ability to tap into? Sure. Do I believe her sending him into the Upside Down? Sure. But the rest of it doesn't quite work for me. And with the thing about her having that memory, I do have a couple objections to it that are a little bit different from yours. One is just that I think is preposterous.
That we're in agreement on.
Going back to episode 4 and all of the things that I said about that montage, how easy it could have been, cheesy, ham-fisted. This is cheesy. This is ham-fisted, because the very first thing that Elle apparently saw when she opened her eyes was Brenner.
Mm-hmm.
And then she sees her mother, and her mother says, "I love you." To your point about Elle being grounded and Elle's motivation coming from empathy, you're absolutely right.
It's her core. Yeah.
But her motivation comes from empathy. Her power comes from her anger. Her anger is directed toward the threat. And so her being motivated by her mother saying, "I love you," there's a step missing there. "I love you" is good, but that's not going to trip her anger. The anger is going to be tripped by the memory of her mother being dragged away.
Right.
So even if they hadn't done the birth memory, which seriously, what were you thinking? If they had just done a flash of her mother coming in like that, they've kind of shown it before where she didn't get to spend a lot of time with Elle before she was dragged away. But if there could be some flash of a moment of her walking in and being like, "Jane, I love you," and then seeing her being dragged away immediately thereafter.
You already have it. Move that montage of everything you just described. When she says no, that's when he starts throwing her around. He turns her around and have the montage that exists. She thinks of her mother. She thinks of all these other dead kids. You move it to when she is in the air, to where she remembers her own birth, and it works. I mean, all of the stuff with Henry, as insofar as apart from it being too long and a little bit too much all at once, I actually really enjoy the reveal that he is Henry Creel.
Mm-hmm.
The way that is all revealed to us, and the idea of him as a character is really interesting. So I appreciate that side of it, because it's the title of the episode, The Massacre at Hawkins Lab.
Mm-hmm.
He did it. So, of course, he's at the center of this episode. And it's we're reminded of how that's what she did to the Demogorgon at the end of season 1.
Yep.
We're kind of stepping into controversial territory here, because I know that a lot of people love this episode.
I think I liked it more the first time. Gratified that I was right about VH1.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I was kind of I'll figure out what all of this meant later, kind of deal.
There is a sense of wow, we finally have the answer. We have the answer to such a huge question. We had so many answers given to us in this sequence. And I think that might be a big part of why this ending and this episode does have as much goodwill around it as it does, because it is very gratifying in terms of how all of these moving pieces finally came together. And as far as comparing this to the Dear Billy running up that hill sequence, our relationship to what we are seeing in Dear Billy versus here, we have been with Max on that journey. We have our own relationship with those moments.
Yeah.
The stuff in the junkyard, her becoming friends with Dustin and Lucas, her and Lucas, at the snowball, her shopping with Elle, her relationship with Elle. That is so much more personal for us.
Mm-hmm.
This is all new. And so for that reason, this is a lot more to take in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So sorry.
Yeah.
And again, if, listeners, if you like this sequence, don't let us yuck your yum,
Yeah, for real. Yeah, your mileage may vary, and, just because it doesn't work for us doesn't mean that it doesn't work for you or shouldn't work for you.
Yeah. But yeah, the episode officially ends with the reveal of
the one.
The one. And that's the end. Woof. The final thoughts. In terms of the episode as a whole, I really don't like the ending. It's almost a harder place to end than chapter 6 was. It's so intense. I mean, it's very dark. But that aside, I love the way it starts. I mean, they save Steve, so there's that. But like just in terms of all the Hawkins stuff and all, you know, I dig the Demogorgon fight. You know, it actually kind of reminds me of chapter 5 in that I was ready to walk into that episode and be like, oh, here we go. But like that's the episode with the Creel house. Like, so I think it's really interesting that you have these different threads happening where there's stuff that doesn't land for us, but ultimately there's a lot else happening that's really good. And I'm trying to not overlook those things because those moments are really great. Like I do really love the stuff between Steve and Nancy that is handled so well. One thing we didn't say in our discussion about it was what we said in 2022, which is that's not, I mean, we talked about the female gaze of it all, but how I also just, it's really classy. That's really hard to accomplish, especially in a love triangle scenario. And on the whole, I actually do like this episode a lot. Like a lot.
I feel like this is kind of suffers from the Dear Billy syndrome, but in like an inverted way where like, you know, Dear Billy, like there's so much awesome stuff that happens throughout the whole episode, but I don't remember any of it because I remember the things that happened, but I don't remember that they happen in the same episode as Running Up That Hill. And in this, there's so many awesome things that happen in the episode, but they get overshadowed by just this kind of clunky ending.
Yeah, it's funny because it's like I don't even know if clunky is I'm not invalidating your read of it at all, but
of course
that's not necessarily the word that I guess I would use. I just feel like it's misdirected. But, you know, that's just my personal takeaway. And I don't want to take away anybody else's experience of it. So that's not a terribly uplifting place to end, but I think that is going to conclude our contemplation on Chapter 7, The Massacre at Hawkins Lab. Thank you for listening. I don't know. I feel like, I don't know. I feel really uncomfortable with leaving it there, but so I hope listeners you're still with us after that. You can join the conversation. We're on TikTok and Instagram, and you can send us an email. All the necessary links are in the show notes. And if you are a fan of our pod, consider rating and reviewing us. Coffee and Contemplation is available wherever you get your podcasts. So again, thanks for listening. And until next time, over and out.
Over and out. Could you turn the headphones volume down a little bit without, let's see. Perfect.
As a kid, like I was not a kid who could really deal with one juice box. I was like, I'm gonna need like 2 of those.
Well, that's the amount of juice that you should be taking in, but that's not adequate to hydrate you.
So when she's like, when it's empty, I was like, well, obviously.
Yeah.